I told you it was inevitable. Under cover of night, Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed to the Supreme Court, fulfilling what a whole bunch of conservatives hope will be the dismantling of one of their most hated legal decisions, Roe versus Wade. That's right. For those lay conservatives who are just as broke as you and me are, keeping women from having a legal abortion is that important to them because they've been convinced by the conservative political class that the preservation of their culture hinges on denying women bodily autonomy. But this really isn't about culture, no matter what conservatives say. This is really the end game in a long GOP strategy to secure their hold on power as their political party is actually losing it. They aren't expanding their voter base. Your average GOP voter lives so physically far removed from people who are not like them that the Mayberry America that they grew up believing in is only realistic because they live so far removed from real life as it exists for the rest of us. They believe that those of us who experience the lasting legacy of this country's centuries of injustice are all a bunch of whiny crybabies who just want handouts. They believe this to their core simply because they live around people who do not experience life as we do, and they tell each other that our experience is a figment of our indoctrinated imagination, not even realizing that they are the ones who are indoctrinated. They do indeed hate us, a lot of them do, because they believe that we are a threat to their mythical American way of life, even though that way of life produced and profited from slavery, the violent dismantling of Reconstruction, the brutal implementation of Jim Crow in the South, the racist violence opposing desegregation across the country, the racist discrimination against Chinese, Mexican, the near genocide of indigenous people, the humiliating and often violent stigmatization of gender nonconforming citizens. And the only way that we cannot be the targets of their scorn, rage, and increasing violence, both political and physical, is to be just as dismissive of that unacknowledged and unrepented for history and the legacy of it as they are, and to demonize the same people they do. They believe that having someone interpret the Constitution in an originalist manner, meaning sticking to the wording and the intent that the framers had in mind centuries ago, is a benefit to them because it means that fewer who are ideologically and culturally unlike them will have the same legal standing in this country as they do. Yes, folks, these people really are fine with denying women autonomy over their bodies, denying mostly Black and Latinx and indigenous citizens the right to vote. Absolutely, even if some poor whites get caught up in the dragnet, denying people who don't live in their communities the right to due process in the justice system, denying an equal and quality public education to all, letting people die for lack of affordable health care. They really are okay with this. Conservative voters don't believe these issues affect them, of course, until they do. So they really don't care if these issues destroy other people's lives. Let's be clear on this and finally admit that conservative voters know that they're voting to disenfranchise people not like them because they believe it benefits them in some way, even if what they are conserving for their lives is just a deeply flawed ideology as they struggle financially with the exact same issues you and I face. But when Mitch McConnell said the quiet part out loud yesterday and admitted that the confirmation of Barrett to the Supreme Court was a political asset for the GOP, he really wasn't talking specifically about any of that. After decades of the GOP claiming in public that Supreme Court justices should be apolitical and that they opposed activist judges appointed by liberals, McConnell admitted that the overall goal of maintaining GOP power in a shifting political landscape was the purpose of confirming Barrett, who is just 48 years old, to a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. Now, this is important for a party that knows it probably won't win many more national elections, especially if they manage to steal and suppress their way to winning this one. I honestly don't see the GOP being able to advance any candidate in the future who's not Trump-like and win. And you know what? Neither do they. And the era of the GOP moderate is over since they're now backing Biden. So the GOP is basically done as a legitimate party politically, nationally. They'll probably continue to steal state and local elections here and there, but the demographics of this country are changing faster than they can do that, and they've known this for a long time. So the strategy was to accept some short-term losses for long-term gains. The GOP was fine with the Tea Party turning off so many moderate Republicans and scuttling any chance of a viable challenger to Obama in 2012, but they were willing to lose the White House to control Congress, and they did. The same strategy has played out here, where they're willing to risk losing the White House for a second 4-year term to control the Supreme Court for at least 40 years. That is, if the Democrats don't get smart and actually mount a counter strategy themselves, should they win the White House this time. But that would mean they would have to court progressive voters to expand their base. And you know they're not going to do that. So what is ultimately being accomplished here is the GOP's ability to ensure that the federal government's role in shaping policy is as narrow as the framers' intent was when they wrote that all men were created equal, but they only meant rich, white, landowning white men. The boundaries of that original intent that were expanded by amendments to extend rights to the formerly enslaved, the indigenous, and to women is as far as interpretation of the law on a constitutional basis that conservatives will ever go. Everything else will be decided from the perspective that the original intent of the Constitution was that the federal government would have limited influence on the autonomous governance of the states and even less influence on the practices of private business. This is the end game of the conservative political class. It's what it has always been from the birth of the so-called moral majority. And honestly, it was long before that, back to the wars fought to steal land from the indigenous and to maintain and expand slavery, to the rise of the insurgent and fanatical Tea Party. What lay conservatives believe is about upholding so-called old-fashioned Christian values that this country was never actually founded on, has really always been about conserving white, male, capitalist power in this society with little interference from a modern interpretation of the Constitution that actually creates a more perfect union that includes everyone being equal and equally protected in it. Anyone who defends that power structure can benefit from it, even if they're not white or male. Once again, the Democrats have been playing checkers, and the GOP has been playing chess. Checkmate. Follow Luke Mon Nation on patreon.com/LukeMonNation for lots of great content.